The Last Jedi in 3D. The 3D is good, and I felt it had plenty of depth, and it did not lack. I've heard people kind of be dismissive of the 3D in this movie, but no, I think it's every bit as interesting as you want it to be, but it is just sort of there and ever present, but never given anything to do. Now, the editing is rarely quick, and 3D prefers it slow, so you do get time to soak it in, which may actually work against this movie because there's a lot of elements here that a lot of people do not want to soak in. Maybe let's save that for later. The cinematography is very different than The Force Awakens. Did you notice any fun angles? The photography felt very serious to me. My feeling was not one of a thrill ride, but rather these pictures were reverent and wanted me to pay attention to what was being said. From an action movie perspective, I noticed just how dry this is, like Shakespeare in the Park, like watching a filmed play. Not a movie adaptation, but a play with a beautiful setting as a stage. But let me stop here and say the acting is superb. A real treat is the big moment with Snoke. On the bonus disc, they show the entire scene without the CGI, and what a prize it is to watch Andy Serkis deliver that performance. That's a standing ovation on any stage. Also, I felt Mark Hamill delivers, I think, the best performance of his life. And now maybe this story didn't belong in Star Wars, but the actors involved gave this 110%. The conflict between Poe and Holdo felt intense. The Rose character, discovering Finn was trying to escape, her face went wonderfully from happy to hurt to anger, all in a moment. Now, this wasn't a stage at the community center. This is an action movie. And there's surprisingly little action, but one silly but terrific 3D moment is the horses running through the back alley. And for just a moment, it felt like the roller coaster I wanted to be on. Now, the plot felt more like the first Star Trek movie, where they spend the time working out various interpersonal conflicts and pondering the motivations of a space anomaly. And to enjoy this Last Jedi, I think you have to imagine you're watching Star Trek or some other generic space movie. And from that perspective, I think it would have been a much better film if it ended with that big ship explosion. That really felt like the end of the movie, with perhaps a few minutes to show everyone scrambling out. And, well, having said that, I also feel everything with Luke could have been entirely dropped. The entire plot with him had no connection to the main trunk of the movie. It wasn't a subplot, it was an alternative plot. And Rey's visions with Kylo would have been far more effective if she were in danger with everyone else on the ship and maybe being taunted to come over to the big ship as an excuse to save everyone or some kind of bargaining like that. But ignoring that, it's no joke that this is beautifully shot. This is a gorgeous movie, and everyone who contributed to the graphics on this thing did such a superb job. And I'm not trying to be funny in saying this makes a good aquarium or a fireplace video. Watch it on mute with some nice music playing, perhaps the soundtrack or Pink Floyd or ambient EDM would work, and just space out. Now, it's rare for a sequel to be better than its predecessor. It happens, but bad sequels are common. They're generally not paid much attention to. However, I cannot think of a follow-up that was so impactful that it actually damaged the reputation of what came before it. I'm reminded of Stephen King's book, Misery, and the plot involves a popular author who decides to kill off his most popular character. An enraged fan has him chained to a bed and forces him to write a follow-up. So he does. He starts writing a new book as if the events of the last book never happened. And she stops him and demands he start again. She cries, "You just can't make up stuff and ignore what came before. It was cheating." As an example, she talked about a serial that ended with the hero going off a cliff and exploding. She spent the next week imagining how he could possibly get out of that. And in the next episode, it showed him jump out before it went over the cliff, and it made her mad. It was cheating. That was not the information provided before. And it made all her thinking pointless. And I can agree, movies, especially sequels, are like a card game. And after the hand is dealt, you have to live with what's on the table. What makes Star Wars fun is not that the stories were all that profound or great, but that it provided a rich soil for you to plant your own ideas and imagine how they'd grow in this world. Now, Mary Poppins here is absurd, but it's a great 3D moment, and I love how they use it to foreshadow the big moment in the film. One thing the prequels did wrong was a lot of people's thought games really enjoyed the idea of a Jedi being a self-made man. And when they introduced the idea of the midichlorians in Phantom Menace, really set fire to a lot of people's internal fan fiction. Although this movie, by comparison, is a forest fire. And it wasn't so much that it made some errors. On its own, Kylo yelling for a gun instead of a blaster isn't a huge deal. But there is such consistency in getting it wrong that you realize the producers of the movie just didn't care. And a casino that changes its rules as it goes along is a cheat. There's no reason to go to that casino. Without rules, there's no game. Ever watch Troll 2? I don't mean the modern cartoon, but the cheap horror movie from the late 80s. It's known for being so bad it's funny. That it was bad isn't remarkable. Anyone can do that. But what was fascinating is you could tell it actually had something to say. It was organized. The shots were purposeful, but it all seemed to be reflected through a funhouse mirror. Years later, one of the actors made a documentary about it, and I learned that it was written and directed by a couple who spoke very little English. And yet they were making an English movie with very little grasp of the English language. And that's what The Last Jedi is. It's a Star Wars movie that didn't speak Star Wars. But let's set aside what this movie isn't, and let's take a look at what it is. Disillusionment. My favorite description of evil is that of a closed system. On one side, the explosive destruction of the Red Devil. The other and less understood evil is a protective angel that reacts in horror to the devil and demands control, safety. This must never happen again. And that becomes unbearable, and the solution goes back to destruction, pull it all apart, and the cycle goes on. Yin-yang and Phoenix Rising is not how life works, but a description of evil. Both sides kill life. And Kylo Ren seems to explode under the control of Snoke, like he did with Luke. Poe versus Commander Holdo, the more one erupts, the more the other turns to stone. Rose contains Finn, but they're a hopeful couple. They start to listen to each other. And ultimately, we get Kylo getting a last lesson from Luke. Kylo finds himself unable to destroy or control Luke. And what are you then? If you're unable to destroy or control, what is left?